So I was weighing whether or not I was going to play this for you guys tonight. Um, this is Comrade. Yes, from everything that I've seen from this guy, like he fits the very definition of a comrade. Um, and you will see why in a few seconds actually. But like I was debating whether or not to play this in full, but what won out was what won out rather was the fact that this was meant to be seen. Um, Comrade Bushnell, an active duty United States Air Force airman, made the ultimate sacrifice today. Like whenever you hear talk of the military in the United States, like they refer to soldiers who have died as making the ultimate sacrifice. But sacrifice for who? Sacrifice for the toiling people of the world? No. The average American soldier that dies for imperialism, dies for Halliburton, dies for Raytheon, dies for Lockheed Martin, dies for people who ultimately do not give a shit about us. And they don't just not give a shit about us, they don't give a shit about anything but their profit margins, how much money they can make. So the average American soldier dies for these merchants of death, these evil men, these evil women, these evil people who are actively contributing to making our planet uninhabitable and to making the life of the average human being in both the first and third worlds hell. So, the title of this stream is The Bravest Soldier. And why did I title it this? Because when we talk about soldiers, of course, like I just said, we're talking about people who make the ultimate sacrifice. And in this case, uh, Comrade Bushnell, Aaron Bushnell, 25 years old, of the United States Air Force, made his sacrifice on behalf of humanity, on behalf of the struggling people of Gaza. So I was like, okay, I really don't want to show these people a dude burning himself to death, but fuck that. Like, he intended this to be seen. He intended to, through his sacrifice, galvanize the moderate, the fence sitter, those who don't give a fuck into action. And he wore his uniform to demonstrate that, hey, yeah, I've been working for the bad guys. I've been helping out the bad guys. And this is my penance. This is my penance. So let's hear Comrade, Brother Bushnell's last words.
I'm an active duty member of the United States Air Force, and I will no longer be complicit in genocide. I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest, but compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, it's not extreme at all. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal.
And that's why I keep calling him Comrade Bushnell. He's using terms like colonizer, ruling class. Like, this is an extremely politically advanced comrade. That's why I call him that. And like people were initially iffy, like, oh, he's still a soldier. Like, shut the fuck up, okay? Like, shut the fuck up. None of you all had the fortitude. None of the people that are like trying to throw their little salt in the game and talk shit, none of you all had the balls, had the fortitude to do what this guy did. None of you all had the fortitude to raise a hand to this system. You put the red triangle on your Twitter and you do all this, you do all that, you talk about it, but you don't even raise it with your coworkers. Like, I showed this video to my coworker tonight, and she was mortified. Like, why would this young man throw his life away? And I explained to her, like, he didn't throw his life away. He literally is saying that we in the first world, him as a United States soldier, We're complicit. There was a literal massacre on the night of the Super Bowl. And Americans, they scrolled their Twitter feed, oh my God, that's horrible. And then they went back to watching the fucking game. They went back to watching the fucking game and cramming their mouths with pizza and Pepsi and breadsticks and went on living their miserable, sad little lives. The Petrograd Soviets had soldiers of some of the army on their side. And yeah, like my position is that we need people who are in the military. We need people who have these skills. And part of the reason why, a major reason why the Bolsheviks were able to conquer power in the Russian Empire and ultimately abolish the Russian Empire was because a large chunk of the active duty military, and these guys were not like the US military. These were conscripts. They were literally dragged out of the factories. They were dragged off their farms. They had no shoes. They didn't even have bullets for their rifles. And these guys were like, you know what? Fuck it. The Bolsheviks were engaged in active organization of these conscripts. And there you go. They played the role in making history. Ultra Vinny Boss says, I wonder what's going through his head in these moments. It's grim determination. He's like, this is a face. This is the action of a man who said, fuck it. Like, fuck it. If you motherfuckers aren't going to do anything to stop this genocide, then you know what? If I must be a sacrifice to get you people to move a finger, then I'm willing. Like, everybody's talking about it. It's time to be about it. And I saw somebody like described his act as an individualist anarchist act. Yes, it was. It's individualism. He's an individual. He has no org backing him. But hey, that's a, yes, he did die. But that's the left. That's the left of this country. We're so busy arguing over useless fucking shit that happened years ago. And like our comrades, people who need to be front and center, like there's nothing to capture comrades like this and steer them in a direction that will ultimately lead to us taking power. This is a condemnation, not just of American imperialism, but of the bullshit that the left is on in this country. Like at a certain point, protest marches and calling your representative. Like, honestly, the best action that I've seen against the genocide in Gaza has come from Palestine action. It's come from Palestine action in both the United States and in the United Kingdom, because they're actually taking the fight to the enemy. They're actually causing material damage to the people who are causing material damage to the people of Gaza. Like, they've driven Elbit systems up the wall, back down, and back up again. Like, that's what we need millions of people to be doing. People who are willing to go to jail, people who are willing to get fucked up, because that's what's happening in Gaza right now. If we truly feel the pain of our brothers and sisters and comrades in Palestine, then we have to start suffering too. Like, no more can we talk all day on Twitter about, oh, this is horrible. This is horrible. Like, no, come out your pockets with some money. Come out your pockets with some money. Put yourself at risk. Lay yourself on the gears of American imperialism if you're serious about destroying it. I think it's worth noting that some folks who join the military don't become radicalized until after they've joined. So they can't just leave. You've got some people stuck on 6 years contracts. What should they go AWOL for and risk prison because they realized Marx was white? But like, there's several ways to get through that shit. Like, if you listen to Eyes Left podcast, they offer like resources and materials to help conscientious objectors or people who have realized that, you know what, this is fucking full of shit. This is bullshit. So you got the security guard saying, "Hey, sir, can I help you?"
Can I help you, sir?
So he has self-immolated. He set himself on fire in protest and desperation and disgust of the shit that's been happening. Like, this is an act of desperation. This is an act of desperation.
Free
Hey!
Palestine!
Hey!
Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
Man's on fire! Man's on fire!
Free Palestine!
Get on the ground! On the ground! On the ground! Get on the ground!
Note that this man is literally on fire. How the fuck is he supposed to, like, why are you yelling at him to get on the ground? Like, why are you, your first action should be to find something to put the fire out. And it gets worse from here.
On the ground! On the ground! On the ground! Who's got a fire extinguisher? Get a fire extinguisher! Who's got a fire extinguisher? Call the board! Call the board! Call the board! Get me a fire extinguisher! Get the fire extinguisher! Jesus Christ! Hey, get the fire extinguisher! I'll cover you. I'll cover you.
Look at this. This dumbass, this man is on fire. He's on fire. He shouted with his last breath, "Free Palestine." And this idiot, this Secret Service idiot, all these guys are Secret Service from what I've heard. No, the police do not shoot him. He's already, like, the guy's on fire. And why would you, like, this is literally in the future history books of the People's Republic of what was once America. Like, this is going to be front and center. This is how fucked up our society is. This is why Comrade Bushnell set himself on fire. We live in an empire of death. An empire of death. A gun for a man who's on fire, wearing the uniform of his country.
Pop the trunk! Pop the trunk! Hey. Give me up! Give me up! I need a fire
They
extinguisher!
have it right here. It's coming. He said he has it. Another one. Another one.
And he's still holding a gun on this man that is literally dying. Like, I'm really sickened. But this is sickening. You got one dude over here. I don't give a fuck about the protocol or the procedure. Okay? Like, this man is no threat to nobody. This guy is no threat to nobody. Why do you have your gun out?
I don't need guns, I need fire extinguishers!
So you got white shirt. Generally in the police force, the guys in the white shirts, those are the majors, the lieutenants. So you've literally got the guy who's in charge screaming, "I don't need guns. I need fire extinguishers." That's the least insane pig in America.
Put him out, sorry. Go! Come on.
Keep on.
Hey, I'm going to the 50, I go. What is this? I need fireboard. What is this? Who is this?
I think the cop was yelling, "Get on the ground," so he could roll around. I don't think he realized the guy intentionally started to set himself on fire. That being said, it's amazing how ACAB still managed to be relevant even when the video has nothing to do with cops. Pointing a gun at a charred corpse, exactly. So, who was Aaron Bushnell before he joined the United States military? Xylem worked with Bushnell to support San Antonio's unhoused residents. And his comrades said that he's always trying to think about how we can actually achieve liberation for all with a smile on his face. This is how we should remember him. And 2 hours ago, he succumbed to his injuries. He didn't make it. I was hopeful that he would make it, that he would live. But, I mean, you can only be on fire for so long. I will no longer be complicit to genocide. I'm about to engage in an extreme active protest. But compared to what the Palestinian people have experienced at the hands of their colonizers, it's not extreme at all. But, yeah, that's really all I have to say. Also, he's trending. He's trending. Yeah, 11,000 posts about him. So we need to see it. If we don't see this on the news tomorrow, we know that there's some blackout shit going on. They don't want people to find out that a member of the American military made the ultimate sacrifice for good this time. They don't want us to know about that. So be sure to watch the news tomorrow and talk about, keep talking about this. Not just this, but everything that's going on in Palestine, that's going on in Sudan, that's going on in the Congo. Like, we have to not just talk about it, though. We have to actually organize and lay our bodies on the line against this shit. Like, look at this. The Missouri Attorney General, the Attorney General of my state, has issued 3 cease and desist letters to 3 area school districts. Why?
The Missouri Attorney General is taking action against 3 St. Louis area school districts. Andrew Bailey sent the districts a cease and desist letter accusing them of religious and racial discrimination. Bailey accuses the Lindbergh School District of using race-based criteria to increase diversity in its gifted programs. He says Parkway schools are preventing students from forming religious-based clubs, and he accuses the Webster Grove School District of using unlawful racial criteria.
This is also the same guy that has declared war on trans kids in our schools, by the way. And Lindbergh, Parkway, and Webster Grove, like, these are districts that are in relatively wealthy suburbs of St. Louis. This is not St. Louis Public Schools. So, yeah, this attorney general is an agent of injustice. He doesn't care about, like, if this was a Muslim student group, he wouldn't take up their cause. This is Christian Athletes of America or some shit. So he's trying to turn us into a transphobic, racist theocracy, a racist, transphobic Christian theocracy. This is what happens when you have our enemies in power and we're really not able to do anything about it. This is why people feel compelled to set themselves on fucking fire, because the fucking country is on fire. We have shit like this. Trump is going to win again. It's a given. I'm not even going to delude myself, and I'm certainly not going to delude my audience. Trump is going to win again, even if Trump doesn't win again. Like, all of this shit is happening under Biden, and his senile ass is not doing anything but doubling down, expediting, sending emergency weapons to Israel, to help them kill more people. Like, the official death toll, if I recall correctly, just crossed the 30,000 threshold. I can't talk tonight. Just crossed the 30,000 threshold. And that's not counting the people that are buried under buildings, whose bodies have disintegrated. Like, I guarantee you, it's probably closer to 50 or 60,000. But am I a doomer? No. Because as Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Mao taught us, like, communism is inevitable. Communism is inevitable. We are not, our species is not doomed. Okay? This country, this sick, disgusting, perverted excuse for a country is what's doomed. And I understand, like, it's tempting. It's very tempting to look at all this bad shit that's happening and look at your own powerlessness as an individual and be like, you know what, fuck it. There's nothing I can do. But you can't think like that. That's not a communist method of thinking. That's a petty bourgeois, declassed method of thinking. The proletarian revolutionary, the working class, is always optimistic. The working class knows, the revolutionary working class knows that victory is inevitable, even if it takes sacrifices like Comrade Bushnell. Even if it takes sacrifice, like, we are one day going to look upon the charred ruins of the White House. And you have to believe that because it's true. It's what's going to happen. Did you guys know that DC was 70% black all the way up until 2010? DC had been a location for black safety. Well, I would argue on the safety part. There's really nowhere in this country that black people are safe. Black culture and all economic backgrounds, especially for successful black people. Like, how do you define success? Like, even if you are a so-called successful black person, you're still gonna fucking suffer. And poor working class, which all built almost everything you see in DC. Like, when we were enslaved, like, we built this, we built the Capitol, we built the White House, and I'm also pretty confident that we helped the Brits burn it down in 1812. So, yeah, we built fucking DC. It's the original chocolate city. Hey, Black Redguard, do you think that if Trump wins, he'll ally with neo-Tsarist Russia and social imperialist China to fight against us Maoists? And do I think that we're going to win at the end? Honestly, I don't think Trump is thinking about Maoists. I don't even think he knows what a Maoist is. He has like a vague notion of the left as being Antifa, but I don't think he cares all that much about ideological distinctions amongst leftists. If a leftist movement becomes a threat, any president, Trump, Biden, Harris, or whatever, is going to move to suppress that, so we have to be ready for that. Al Danimarki, one of my favorite accounts, says that this is likely the first time in history that an active duty soldier in the U.S. Armed Forces has committed self-immolation as an act of protest. Yeah, I've never heard about this before. What's this?
Well, so did these guys, and they almost went to war over that issue in 19th century New York. These guys were the anti-renters of the Hudson Valley, and they couldn't pay the extortionist rent charged by absentee landlords.
Did you guys know that, like, in upstate New York, like the Van Rensselaer family, Vanderbilts and all these different, like, Dutch originated families, like, they basically operated what were essentially fiefdoms? Yeah, patroonships. And I think the biggest of these was the Van Rensselaer family. But yeah, let me look up. I don't want to miseducate my people. But yeah, they were extremely powerful, and they basically treated their people as the people that lived on their land as feudal serfs. Yeah, the Van Rensselaer's family is a family of Dutch descent that was prominent during the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries in the area now known as the state of New York. They are best known for the Rensselaerswyck estate of roughly 1 million acres, which, although broken up by the anti-rent revolt in the 1840s, had long cemented the Van Rensselaer family as one of the wealthiest in early America. Let's go back to see what this dude says.
Called patroons. Now, patroons were these huge landowners that go back to the Dutch colonial era of the 17th century, and they still owned vast tracts of land that were settled by tenants in the 19th century, and these guys were not going to put up with it anymore. They issued badass calls to action like these and made declarations.
This actually looks like, I wonder if they had any ties to the abolitionist movement. This literally looks like an abolitionist pamphlet or flyer.
Such as, "We will take up the ball of the revolution where our fathers stopped it and roll it to the final consummation of freedom and independence of the masses." About 60,000 anti-renters organized, and bands of them would dress up like this to hide their identities and intimidate their enemies, and they would launch excursions and incursions on farms and on land, and generally just disobey the orders of their feudal lords, because that's essentially what patroons were. They ruled a vast feudal system where these people had basically no rights. They even faced off against the governor of New York and about 700 militiamen, but they were able to achieve their goals without much bloodshed.
A peaceful revolution?
They managed to amend the New York State Constitution to abolish feudal tenure and establish tenants' rights.
It's wild that, like, we literally had fucking feudalism in this country, and many people don't know that this happened, that this existed.
But there's a twist to this story that affected us very, very recently, and it's because they looked like this. You see, in addition to granting the anti-renters what they wanted, the New York State legislature also banned the wearing of masks because they just simply could not handle somebody looking this cool and making such demands and organizing at the scale that they were. And what this means is that the anti-mask law that New York enacted in the 1840s was still on the books and enforced in the 2020s. So that means at the beginning of the pandemic, it was illegal to wear a mask. And the New York State Legislature did not overturn this ban on mask wearing until months in the pandemic.
So you're still, like, you got people that are getting sick and dying because of a fucking prohibition on mask wearing that originates to class struggle in the 1840s. Like, why don't we just go through and like look for all these? They're called blue laws, basically like shit that was established when we were, well, I mean, we're still a backwards country, but like when we still had people dying at the age of 35 from typhoid. Like, laws that were made back then should not still be on the books. Like, why don't we just go through like every few years or so and look for all these antiquated laws and just like automatically overturn them?
Into the pandemic in May of 2020. And since New York did abolish that anti-mask law, I say we bring this energy back, because after all, the rent is too damn high.
Communists when we get our taxes back. This guy bought a sword with his taxes. I'm pretty sure he took that off one of the SARS boys. Losing my mind right now. After today's self-immolation, I just spent the last hour trying to figure out what happened to the woman who self-immolated outside the Israeli consulate in Atlanta in December. I can't even find her name. I know I might be missing something, but a dozen articles and combing Twitter, and I don't even know who that person was with a longer condition. Terrifying stuff. I see why the man who took such drastic action today worked to get photo and video and media attention. Yeah, because otherwise they'll literally bury you. And these protests are meant to be seen. They're not meant to be buried. They're meant to galvanize people into action. 3 kinds of leftists get involved in organizations. 1, folks who want a better world. 2, folks who need absolution for the sin of living in this one. And 3, folks who desperately want to be someone's manager but lack the personal and functional skills to do it in the professional world. Legendary Chicago house DJ Jesse Saunders suffered a stroke in 22 and is in need of financial assistance to maintain his place in a care facility. So, yeah, help him out if you like house music, like I do. The incident appears to be in protest of Israel. It was in protest. The guy literally said that. This is why you need to let people see this shit for themselves. That's why I showed it. This is America's it. Compare Brother Bushnell. Like, there's 2 types of white people in this country. Like, the revolution in this country is ultimately going to be like a civil war. And white people are going to be like divided along the middle. And shit, honestly, everybody's going to be divided along class lines. Like, do you really think that Beyonce and Jay-Z and all these other rich motherfuckers, Puffy and all these types of people, Kamala Harris, like, do you really think that they're going to be fighting on the side of the black masses? No. They're going to be fighting on the side of the white masters. And people like Kid Rock are going to be right alongside with them. People like Aaron Bushnell, on the other hand, people who see themselves not as white, but as being part of humanity, are going to be on our side. So we can't just like lump all white people, all settlers into like enemy. That's not going to work. That's anti-dialectical. That's undialectical. Like, we actually have to look at actions. We have to look at politics. So this is reactionary white America's heads.
I don't
Basically, it's basest urge.
disagree with what Israel's doing. It's like, they should just go in there and be like,
Also, like, this dude, he postures himself and he acts like he's a poor working class redneck. This dude grew up rich as fuck. And he cosplays a fucking country boy.
you know what? We want our hostages back. If we don't have them back, clock starts now in fucking 24 hours. We're going to start bombing motherfuckers and killing fucking civilians. 30, 40,000 a fucking time. So you civilians better fucking pack up and fucking get these fucking motherfuckers and you go against Hamas. You fucking go against them. We're not playing fucking games with you. But that's the only thing people understand. This is what happened to
This is literal fascism. Like, this is how a lot of white people in this country think. This guy needs to be fucking upside down. Here's a cool video. This is a video by Brother Bamis. Highly recommend.
This video is sponsored by
I recommend everything that he makes.
Vlog brothers. I have nothing but a simple question. What's the first building that comes to your mind when you think of African architecture? Yeah, I'm very sure it's going to be the typical mud house. For some, maybe the majestic pyramids in Egypt, but for most, it's definitely the stereotypical mud hut, which as a concept comes in a wide range of shapes, sizes, and form.
And the funny thing is, like, people always mock Africans for like, oh, you guys live in mud huts. But guess what? Irish built them. The Maltese, the Italians, like everybody has lived in a house that is made out of mud or made out of some type of earthen material. Like in China, they literally have rammed earth, which is a fancy term for mud, dirt. And they used to build some of the strongest walls in the world. Like there are parts of the Great Wall of China that are built with compacted earth, rammed earth. So, a testament to human ingenuity is like our ability to make use of the natural environment to build shelters for ourselves and for our animals. Don't dump on the mud hut.
Just like any architectural expression from around the world, which is an important part of culture, just like clothing, food, and language. So much so that some cultures and entire regions have a distinctive architectural style, from the Chinese in East Asia, the Aztecs in South America, and the Anglo-Saxons in these buildings serve as recognizable symbols for their respective cultures. But for certain people from the grass fields of Cameroon, architecture means everything, where the building itself is more than life. Break. So making these videos requires a lot of time researching, writing, drawing, and so many other things you guys don't get to see. And as a one-man team doing all of this, the financial support from the community, which is you guys, keeps things going. So if you could support me on Patreon or with YouTube channel memberships, which would come with so many perks, it will help keep the lights on. To become a channel member, just click on the join button on the home page of the YouTube channel. And for Patreon, the link will be in the description below. Also, if you like to see those things you guys don't get to see behind the scene, you can. Now let's get back to the video. The people who live in the area called Cameroon today are a very fascinating set, who stand out amongst other things for their unique diversity of architectural styles from the north to the south. Today we'll be looking at one of these people, the Bamileke. The early history of how the Bamileke came to be deserves its own dedicated video, but to keep things short, starting around the 18th century, due to pressure from the Trika and the Fumbe, the ancestors in small successive waves migrated and settled the Bamunda's grass fields. The word Bamileke is used to describe the 90 decentralized chiefdoms around the plateau of the Bamunda grass fields. Bamileke chiefdoms are highly organized, with each chiefdom having a head chief called the Fon, who acts as a military, judicial, and spiritual leader. He is aided in the running of the kingdom by a council of nobles called the Kanvun. But this video is not about Bamileke society. We came to know why for the Bamileke, architecture is more than life. So a second question, what's the value of a house to you? Please, I beg you, do not go looking up house prices. Let's just pretend we can afford them for now, okay? For most people, a house is somewhere to live in, start a family or not, and be all around comfortable. But for the Bamileke, a house means everything. Your house is you. To show you what—
Hey, Kanithia, subscribe to him. Thank you. Support black content creators, especially black African content creators.
I mean, let me transport you back to the past. The year is 18 something, and it's a beautiful day in Banjul, one of the many Bamileke chiefdoms. The mountains
That is a beautiful fucking house. It's like a palace.
and forests are green and brimming with life. And you, like I said, the most important thing is to build your house. Well, it's more like two houses depending on how high you aim to move in society. For now, you are born to a simple Bamileke household. Your father is a woodcarver and your mother is a farmer, like all women in Banjul. The first step to building a house is to be born a male, as females are barred from building and entering the second type of house you will have to build, called the Shang, which is a meeting house any Bamileke man who hopes to reach the top of society must build. It serves as a symbol of his wealth, marital status, and even his bravery in battle. Anything and everything he becomes would be determined and shown by his Shang. It's been a few years since we last saw you. You've grown a bit taller and now can follow your father to work. He's going to carve a pillar and a frame of an entrance. You leave your home and head towards the center of the town, where the market and shire are located. As you enter, you are in hall of the Bondi, the centerpiece of the char, topped with a massive cone-shaped thatched roof, which is a feature of...
What is the name of this channel? This is Bamise, B-A-M-I-S-E. Here, hold on, I will link them in chat. Yeah, you all got to support this guy. Like, you have to support African content creators. Like, I'm kind of privileged because I'm an American and I speak English. Well, Bamise does too, but like, African content creators are in many ways at a disadvantage. So every time I come across an interesting channel that's made by one of our African brothers or sisters or comrades in general, I make sure to share it and watch some of that stuff. Give them some support because we're all in this together.
Or Bamileke buildings. There are also motifs on the wall of the Bondi, the shape of which you have noticed on your...
And it's obvious that this guy, that Bamis, busts his ass on this stuff. Like, all of these extraordinarily detailed and exquisitely drawn illustrations. Like, he makes all this stuff himself, like he just said. Like, people think that content creation and streaming and stuff like that is easy. Making YouTube videos is easy. Like, no. For one, the money isn't even really that good unless you're, like, big. But even then, like, there's still issues. But like, no, this is like painstaking shit. Like me, every night, well, most nights, I take a break some nights, but like, this shit is it's kind of excruciating. You got to do research, you got to source shit, you got to find stuff that people are gonna want to like, that people are gonna be interested in. You got to prepare yourself. You got to, like, sometimes one of these little gizmos and gadgets that I use to stream with, it breaks, and so I gotta, yeah. Like, it's an ass pain. I love it, but this is not easy shit. And I don't even do this like full time. So don't dump on content creators or say we're just a bunch of lazy moochers.
Your older sister's belly. The designs will be added to when she's married and also when she gives birth. The reason why this is done may be controversial
Oh, thank you, Dristoff.
today, but back then it was done to signify the importance of a woman to society. Like I said earlier, women weren't allowed to build houses back then, but were allowed to farm the land. This allowed women to be the literal source of sustenance for their families. When a young girl reaches a marriable age, she'll be given her first scarification to signify her potential to attract wealth for a husband to be, either through farming, formation of alliances, and giving birth to female children who will be able to cultivate more land. In a way, women were the literal...
So this is interesting. Like, most societies, they want male children. Like, especially in like East Asia, places like China, like, they view girls as being a burden because they're married off elsewhere, and they take wealth. No, they take basically a strong pair of hands out of the family. But like, in this particular society, Bamileke, women are actually seen as being essential. And a lot of African societies were like this. I find it weird that even though like women were acknowledged as being the economic and social bedrock of society, they were still oppressed. This was still a patriarchy. Like, I don't think women were allowed to sit on the ruling council of nobles. So it's interesting, like, the interplay in these types of societies.
bedrock of Bamileke society, and by extension embodied the very essence of the buildings they were not allowed to enter. The practice of female scarification would later be abolished in Banjul during the reign of Kamga II. Oh, your father is calling. He points at the long pillar that support the massive roof of the Bondi. You notice how beautifully decorated they are with carved figurines. This is what you guys came to replace. For the next few days, you work tirelessly to replicate one of the old pillars as perfect as you can. Finishing that, you move to the chart to replace part of the frame of one of the entrance. Your father explains that only the royal palace has 4 entrances, and displayed figurines either depicting the 4 in various roles. By the way, your father is already done with the frame and it's time to head back home. Wow, you've grown into a young boy who is ready to be called a man. Not just any man, a notable man in society. And for that, you have to join the Inkem system, which is a pyramid of fraternities with the 4 at the top. The more Inkems you can join, the higher on the ladder of society you would climb. So how do you join the Inkem? Well, you have to build a structure called the Tansum, a building that will undergo continuous renovations to resemble the Fon's Bondi, especially as you join more Inkem as it becomes your Shang. But beware, The location you pick to build on is extremely important. In Bamileke, elevation plays an important role in society. Lowlands are considered to be prime real estate, as they are usually close to a water source. High elevations like the rim of a mountain or hill are seen as undesirable lands for the lower classes and may.
It's interesting. I thought it would be the reverse. Like in most like feudal agricultural societies, like the lords and stuff, they build their castles and stuff like on tops of hills or on tops of mountains. And like they say, shit rolls downhill. So like usually like you've got on top of a hill or even a mountain, you've got either a monastery or you've got a castle, some type of fortress. And at the bottom, like that's where the village is. That's where all the peasants live. Bro, these guys were doing structural analysis before they even knew what a bending moment diagram is.
Consider your chances to join the more prestigious in Kim. It's been a few months since you built your Tansum, and it seems you're ready to take a wife, but you have to build a house for your wife. Luckily, you are a member of the Manjong, an income dedicated to construction. You also call in favors from family and friends to help you out. Everyone has an important role to play. After the land is cleared and the dimension of the foundations are measured out, women dig out the base of the foundation. Timber is then erected at the 4 points to act as pillars of the house. Then stones and mud are used to secure the timber pillars. The next step is the fastening of the prefabricated walls, which are made out of bamboo. Mud is then used to insulate the walls. Now it's time to build the iconic massive thatched roof. A bamboo frame is placed on the building, and skilled carpenters then get to work, building the frame of the roof, covering it with raffia grass. Your house is ready and your wedding goes on without an hitch. Our young boy is now a man, and over the next decades we see you grow in wealth as you join more income. You marry more wives and build more houses, with your Shang, which was once a small Tansum, has grown into one of the finest in all of Banjul. As you move into the higher echelons of society, be ready to face the Germans. This is where we would leave things and maybe come back another time. I hope you enjoyed the video. You could leave a comment, drop a like, or share the video, and also follow me.
That's dope. Until the Germans appeared. Germans ruin everything. Nobody likes Germans. So this was uploaded 8 days ago. This is about controlled opposition. This is one of One Dime's bangers. Let's check it out.
In 2003, the US and UK saw some of the largest protests in history in opposition to the Iraq War. When interviewed about these protests, President George W. Bush's response was that, quote, democracy is a beautiful thing, and that, quote, I welcome people's right to say what they believe. Then President Bush proceeded to ignore the demands of the protesters and go ahead with the war anyway.
This is a lesson to everybody that thinks that like the bigger the march, the greater the chances of like stopping what's going on in Palestine. Like ultimately, marches are good for raising awareness and bringing people into the movement, but in terms of like impacting policy, they ultimately don't do shit.
Looking back, it's quite mind-blowing that what was one of the largest protests in world history ended up having absolutely zero effect on the government's policy. The underlying message of Bush's response was that the protests were not a big deal because they already had democracy, and that the reason for trying to bring democracy to Iraq was so that the Iraqi people would be able to protest their government the same way that citizens do in Western countries here. George W. Bush's decision to ignore the millions of people protesting the Iraq War, a war justified in the name of bringing democracy to Iraq, all while claiming to respect democratic rights to protests, speaks to the hollowness of US democracy and liberal democracy more broadly. In such regimes, you can criticize the government as much as you want, but you can't actually influence much of what they really do. But many people believe that this is a sacred democratic right, always on the verge of being taken away by a much worse threat of fascism. But what if these democratic rights to express dissent are no more than privileges that are allowed to exist as a means of social pacification and political legitimation, rather than being an opportunity given to the people to challenge that system? I personally will never forget the time when large-scale climate protests were happening in Canada where Greta Thunberg was attending, and in response to the protests in Ottawa, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau voiced his support for the protests and literally walked into the protests himself to high-five a bunch of protesters, while proceeding to do practically nothing to seriously combat the climate catastrophe or at the very least stop oil pipelines from being built on Indigenous territory. Remember the massive Black Lives Matter protests that occurred in 2020? Well, they elicited two different responses from Trump Republicans and Biden Democrats, which make for an interesting comparison. The Republican response basically involved Trump calling in the National Guard to violently crush the protests. Meanwhile, the Democrats' response was to performatively take a knee for George Floyd and support Black Lives Matter, while proceeding to do virtually nothing to ameliorate police brutality or advance any sort of systemic change.
So, chat, which you think is more dangerous? Like open repression, which galvanizes people? Yeah, you're still gonna get beat the fuck up. Or like this is literally what Malcolm was talking about when he talked about the wolf and when he talked about the fox. Trump, of course, is the wolf. He's open with what he's about. He doesn't think that Black Lives Matter protesters have any rights, even though he impelled a bunch of car salesmen and fucking soccer moms to storm the Capitol because they're his comrades. But you also got Biden, Biden isn't even a fox. Like, he's openly a wolf too. So, which old wolf?
The second, more liberal response to
That's why y'all need to vote for Sink Uyghur. I'm not voting for Sink Uyghur. I'm not voting for anybody.
protests is the more interesting one to study, and it is often the more effective one. Most people typically understand this phenomenon as co-option, whereby the establishment co-opts progressive elements to pacify voters. But I argue that there's a lot more going on here than just co-option. The tendency for so-called liberal democracies to tolerate large protests while doing nothing to implement the demands of these protests reflects a much larger, multifaceted phenomenon, one that I argue challenges us to rethink our traditional conceptions of power and political hegemony. In this video, I'm going to present you with a quite unconventional theory of power, resistance, and political hegemony. It is a theory of what can be called contained opposition and the desublimation of protest. As we'll see, this theory is quite different from most conceptions of so-called controlled opposition.
Part of what makes this country
I like Teray's metaphor of the snake that says it won't bite you. You all have been reading KT. I'm impressed.
special is that we respect people's rights to have a different opinion.
Deliberate and calculated violence.
May God protect our nation, and may God protect all those who stand watch over our democracy.
One Dime is a fan-funded project. Your support on Patreon is what makes videos like this possible. When it comes to the notion of controlled opposition, some of us may think of things such as the CIA Congress of Cultural Freedom funding a compatible left that would pose no serious threat to the power and agenda of the overarching establishment. Or controlled opposition seen in the likes of Putin's Russia, where different protests are covertly backed by the government, and certain opposition parties are allowed to exist and get votes so long as they don't seriously challenge the dominant United Russia Party and its agendas. Like the current Communist Party of the Russian Federation, or the not-so-liberal Democratic.
I could tell the multipolarity bros are gonna put their foot up this guy's ass. How dare you attack the only communist party in the Russian Federation? Like, no, there's anarchists and Maoists in Russia. Like, you don't have to support the people that have the official fucking stamp of approval. Like the KPRF, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, is basically a bunch of old Soviet bureaucrats and their kids.
Democratic Party of Russia. But the theory I'm about to present you with captures something quite different from this conception of controlled opposition. By no means do I claim my theory to be 100% original. However, what does make it novel is that it incorporates a bunch of theories from the fields of philosophy, psychoanalysis, and sociology into a broader political theory of hegemony.
One thing I like about One Dime, or Tony, I don't think he'll mind me calling him that. One thing I like about him is that like he draws on a wide range of traditions. Like what a lot of leftists do is they're so narrow-minded. They limit themselves to like the understanding that's encompassed in like 10 or 15 books. And that's how they look at the whole world. What Tony does is he draws in a variety of traditions. He's not a dogmatist. He's literally identified himself as a heterodox Marxist. And while I disagree with him on many things, I mean, that's still a very fresh way of looking at the world. And honestly, that's a way to inoculate yourself against dogmatism. It's very refreshing. That's one thing I respect about One Dime.
Within the domain of political science. Some of what I'll be sharing with you today includes lines straight from a book I have coming out in 2024.
Ooh.
The theory I'm about to present you with and the phenomena it describes are meant to apply to most so-called liberal democracies, but I'll be using the United States as the exemplary case study. The theory of contained opposition essentially goes as follows. As the philosopher Michel Foucault famously said, where there is power, there is resistance. Many people take this idea as a case for hope. However, I tend to be quite skeptical of this assumption. I would like to flip this Foucauldian notion on its head. Where power is strong, there is resistance without power. A truly powerful order is not one that removes all resistance, but rather one that tolerates or even encourages resistance. That is, resistance without power. In most critical works of social science and philosophy that diagnose our current society, the writer usually concludes that there are always gaps in the system that forces of resistance can take advantage of. But not all gaps are cracks in the system's power, and not all acts of transgression, even when they are fugitive, are necessarily subversive. One should consider if many of the system's gaps are left open by design. Allowing spaces for dissent is not necessarily a weakness that makes a liberal regime a less powerful society of control than a totalitarian dictatorship. Quite the contrary. This liberal toleration is often a feature, not a bug, of a society of control with far greater confidence in obedience, which some consider to be the very definition of power. The regime that truly holds the most power over its citizens, just like the parental authority who can most effectively shape the will of their children, is not the overbearingly authoritarian one, but rather the one that allows some space for resistance, while remaining confident that these transgressions do not stray too far beyond their will.
Yeah, I agree. Like, the best way to dominate and maintain your power, it's not by Trumpian or fascist type shit, like, okay, if you so much as breathe wrong, we're gonna fuck you up. Like, no, all that's going to do is make more people angry at you, and that's how you get armed struggle in the streets, because people have nothing to lose. But if you allow safety valves, if you allow people to wander around in the street like lemmings, then yeah, people are gonna be like, yeah, shit sucks, but we can vote. We can write our congressmen, we can march, we can do all of these other things. So, and these people that run this country, they're dumb, but they're also very, very, very smart when it comes to how to stay in power. So, very good so far.
Psychology tells us that the best way to get your children to follow your will is not by being an overly controlling helicopter parent, but by guiding their will, rather than suppressing it. By letting the kids go play outside when they want, while shaping the terrain on which they independently walk, so that their path does not stray too far from your ground, so that the will of the children will generally stay in line with the will of the parental authority. even after this authority ceases to be present in their lives.
So basically give them the illusion of free will, give them the illusion of choice, and give them the illusion of being radical.
Let the youth be radical while they're young, so that they can burn out.
Oh, fuck you, Tony. They used to call me Black Napalm because I had no tolerance for bullshit. 25 later, I would just look at somebody like me and say, sell out. I make a joke, like, since I've joined DSA, I'm basically Van Jones now, except I've never had dreads because I don't have hair. I guess I'm more like late Van Jones.
And become disillusioned. And as they get older, they will soon succumb to the established ideologies, which will help give them simple answers to cope with the chaos of reality. The most powerful socio-political orders incorporate a similar logic of power when it comes to both their subjects and their rulers, who temporarily occupy the steering wheels of the great machine. The regime with an intelligent approach to power often tolerates opposition that is compatible with its general logic, resistance that is containable, what we may call contained opposition, rather than controlled opposition. To contain means to hold something from within. The containment of social change does not...
So basically, we're like dogs on fucking leashes. Like, yeah, they'll let you walk around, they'll let you go shit on the floor, they'll let you go, well, they'll let you shit in the grass, they'll let you cock your leg up against a tree and piss. But you're not going to stray too far. The leash is going to yank you back in. And the leash is these co-opted, bought-out-ass leaders, people like Van Jones and Irving Kristol. They're going to yank you back, and they're going to bring you back in line. You can get, like, it's flexible. It's flexible. It's like a jar of jelly. Like, you shake the jelly up. It's going to, okay, you can wiggle this way, you can wiggle that way, but you can't never break out the jar unless you somehow throw the jar to the ground and all the jelly spills out. Revolution is like throwing a jelly jar on the ground and all the jelly that was in the jar falls out. I don't know why I made this illusion. Maybe I need to go make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But yeah. And then you have to build an entirely new jelly jar, a proletarian jelly jar.
Prohibition of all dissent, nor does it require the state to tightly control its citizens, but rather it refers to keeping dissent at the margin.
That the ultimate goal is the abolition of the jelly jar, yes. The jelly should go where it needs to.
Margins, away from real political power. An intelligent regime that is secure in its power would be foolish to fully eliminate all social protests, when all it needs to do is to contain opposition in such a way that it is prevented.
The funny thing is, I actually hate jelly.
From manifesting into a force capable of actually challenging the established parties and their policies. To preserve an illusion of democratic freedom, it is often necessary for a system to occasionally allow oppositional forces perceived to be relatively radical into the spaces of political power, so long as—
Well, don't use my face. Why would you say that? I'm a real communist. What's wrong with you, you fucking young hipsters?
They remain marginal, decaffeinated, and without much influence. The system can maintain its legitimacy by shining light at the end of the tunnel, to give people hope that they can change it. And those blinded by the mirage fail to see that this light at the end of the tunnel is another train about to hit them. But whether this is the case is not always clear, which is why, in the next section, we must illuminate the dialectic of power and the dilemma of hegemony that all regimes inevitably face.
Tony also has an extremely soothing voice. Like, you can still tell he's a young dude, but like he has a very good radio voice.
But first, I want to make something clear. Liberal democracy, even if it is quite far on the spectrum of being a managed democracy with inverted totalitarian characteristics, is obviously still preferable to an actual fascist dictatorship, where you don't have any freedom of expression at all. And despite the thumbnail, I do not want this video to give you the impression that all protests are useless. Clearly, if all protests simply didn't matter, then certain media outlets wouldn't be spending so much effort negatively portraying certain forms of protests while being supportive or indifferent to others. However, media bias when covering protests can often be a little more subtle and not easy to detect, but not with Ground News, the sponsor of today's video. Ground News is a website and app designed to improve media literacy and help people become more aware of different political biases, which can be quite difficult due to the one-dimensional filter bubbles that algorithms get people stuck in. To combat this, Ground News gives you access to an ecosystem of news with thousands of media sources from all across the political spectrum. And most importantly, the application shows
I actually might try that.
Shows you how the same events are covered by different sources. Ground News allows you to compare article headlines, see the relative bias of the sources, and shows you the owners of each media outlet, which is the feature that I personally consider the most useful. Always follow the money. Ground News also has this useful blind spot feature to identify which news stories are underreported by some sides of the political spectrum, and to check what your own political biases might be. And they also have this factuality feature to measure how reliable a source's reporting practices are, based on ratings.
Alright, Tony, quit glazing up your sponsors. I understand.
Parents got news this way instead of from their Facebook news feeds. Check out the link and shut down these protests to prevent them from spreading, or they can tolerate them, make some small compromises, and let them fizzle out. As we will see in the next section, although the second strategy is often the more intelligent form of soft power, there are still risks to both of these strategies. The dialectic of power and the dilemma of hegemony. The notion that absolute power corrupts absolutely is widely considered to be common sense. A government, political party, or ruler that attempts to exert too much control over its population and eliminate all opposition will inevitably fall under the weight of its own power, as the inevitable abuses of this power may cause the people to no longer recognize the legitimacy of this authority. To overcome this dilemma, a system must include an internal self-suspension of power to regulate itself. A system of mediation that allows forces internal and external to it to keep its power in check, yet ensuring the stability of power through a system of checks and balances and the toleration of opposition creates an indeterminacy that could potentially open the door to the possibility, however slim, for radical adversarial forces to capitalize on moments of crisis and displace the reigning power. So the system,
AKA what communists should be trying to do,
has to facilitate an equilibrium of compromises, to buy off forces of resistance that may turn fugitive. However, these compromises might simultaneously exacerbate resistance by empowering the opposition and opening doors to new challenges to the system. This dialectic of power can determine the fate of a regime. However, there is a way that a regime can overcome this dilemma of power, through a system of built-in openings for transgression. Such a system may be slightly more immune to this dilemma of power, as it anticipates a cycle of power and resistance by taking advantage of it. A system that allows for an internalized game of power and resistance can serve a stabilizing function for it. Such a strong system can develop immunity against the diseases it produces, which manifests in the mass upheavals of the herd, by adapting to the sentiments of the multitude of combative forces once they are compromised, so long as they are deprived of power and political antidotes. This internalized cycle of power and resistance facilitates what I call the desublimation of protest.
That's a very new and long word. I'm not a philosopher. I don't fancy myself a philosopher. I don't want to be a philosopher. Everybody that I know that's like gotten really deep into philosophy has ended up crazy as fuck. I don't say that in a bad way, by the way. Like, you gotta be a little crazy to talk about toppling the strongest empire in the history of humanity.
This theory is clearly inspired by Herbert Marcuse's concept of repressive desublimation.
Never read them.
In psychoanalysis, what is called sublimation involves a process whereby a repressed or unsatisfied need is channeled into another action. On the other hand, desublimation involves temporarily satisfying that need, so that it doesn't need to be sublimated, at least in the short term. However, Marcuse himself mainly just used this theory to describe the phenomenon of consumerism and how it dulled people's consciousness by keeping them in a perpetual loop of desire and temporary gratification.
Marcuse also was, if I recall correctly, was one of Angela Davis's professors. Yep.
Which she believed had a pacifying effect that gave people a false sense of happy consciousness that prevented them from rebelling against the status quo. But what Marcuse did not fully consider was that this very logic could be applied to the act of rebelling itself. For a moment, Herbert Marcuse comes close to acknowledging the phenomenon that I call the desublimation of protests, briefly in his book titled Counter-Revolution and Revolt, but he never fleshed it out. For instance, Marcuse critiqued the hippie movement during the counterculture for having a, quote, tranquilizing rather than radicalizing effect.
I agree with Marcuse. Hey, this is actually making me want to read Marcuse.
And he critiqued what he saw as the problem of pacification
I tend to stay away from those 60s French perverts, but that piqued my interest.
and depoliticization in anarchist communes, but he never fleshed this idea out. The theorist that I'm aware of who comes the closest to conceptualizing the phenomenon that I call contained opposition is none other than Slavoj Žižek, and his psychoanalytic concept of inherent transgression. The basic idea of this concept is that every effective legal order and its dominant ideology has a certain space of inherent transgression built inside of it, that gives subjects a sense of freedom and distance from it. This includes spaces where people can transgress the establishment, such as rock concerts, bars, strip clubs, unruly sporting events, edgy radical online spaces, and protests, which are often juxtaposed with activity on the internet as if it's inherently superior, when in reality it can also be its own form of placation. For the most part, none of these spaces actually stand as real threats to the established order, aside from a few exceptions. These things actually reinforce the existing order by making us more invested in it. For more on this Žižekian idea, I highly recommend this article written by my friend and fellow underground theorist Michael Downs, who runs the blog called The Dangerous Maybe. You can also find this general idea expressed in Žižek's own essay titled Resistance is Surrender. My theory is somewhat similar, except it's more so a political theory of hegemony, and the ways in which the relationship between power and resistance in liberal societies reproduce class domination through the simulation of an illusion of democratic politics that serves to legitimize the legal order of the political system that supervises modern capitalism. This theory of contained opposition treats rebellion and protests in liberal capitalist democracies as rules of the system that reinforce its authority, rather than as exceptions that allow it to be democratically challenged. Tolerating a certain level of protest and civil disobedience so that the desire for agitation can be temporarily relieved in ways that do not threaten the status quo should be regarded as an understudied law of hegemony. Effective governmentality, just like effective parenting, acknowledges the inherent human urge for transgression and disobedience, and it allows people outlets to relieve this urge before it gets out of control. This can desublimate the energies of ordinary citizens seeking meaningful change, whose time and energy are already limited by the demands of life in capitalist society. Allowing for a multitude of spontaneous disorganized protests accelerates the time it takes for sequences of political action to reach their point of saturation, by allowing protesters and activists to more rapidly reach a state of exhaustion and burnout after discharging their energies in fleeting, short-lived revolts. Most importantly, the tolerance of such protests preserves the democratic legitimacy of the system, the appearance of political contestation, and the guise of freedom, all while containing most of the risks associated with liberal democracy, like instability, fragility, the power of citizens, etc. The things that dictators typically consider to be liabilities of democracy. If the Soviet Union learned to allow their own form of contained opposition, then maybe they would have one less disadvantage compared to their American adversaries. Maybe
I agree. Nobody likes tanks in the fucking streets. Like, that's a critique I have of them too. Like, they were too closed-minded, and they were too, like, whenever you talk to somebody that grew up in the Soviet Union, like, they always talk about, like, yeah, I mean, we had jobs, we were able to, we didn't have to pay out the ass to have an apartment, but like, you also couldn't say certain shit, and there's nothing that makes people want to say certain shit as legally not being allowed to say certain shit. So, yeah, I actually agree. Like, am I a fucking Gorbachev type liberal? No. But you also have to, like, you cannot restrict people's freedom of speech and other democratic rights because you offer them an opening to fuck you over that way.
if the deeply insecure East German government didn't try to psychotically foreclose every single semblance of dissent, then just maybe...
Let me try to pronounce this. Ministerium for Staatssicherheit. Ministerium für Staatssicherheit.
They could have placated some of the frustration which eventually culminated in the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, the return of the repressed dissent. However, this theory of contained opposition is also dialectical. These liberal freedoms to protest that reinforce the status quo can also potentially be flipped on their head by people who choose to use them to go beyond the system's logic and seriously challenge its power. When this happens, the democratic democratic system typically reveals its true autocratic colors, and resorts to more classic forms of hard power. But the deployment of police in response to protests to restore civil order may obfuscate the reality as to whether the protests in question actually posed a real threat in the first place.
I've been meaning to watch that. Anarch, I think, is actually a very smart dude. Certainly a lot smarter than the average anarchist.
Or if the police were just called in to quash it mainly to appease.
I actually don't think anarchists are stupid. I think anarchists actually have a better grasp of shit, like certain shit that's going on in this country and what needs to be done, than a lot of Marxists who seem to be more intent on navel gazing and intellectual masturbation.
The reactionary sentiments of the conservative voters. For social protests to become meaningful political protests and not just contained opposition, it must at the very least become political. Let us not forget that it is still far better to live in a liberal democracy than it is in a illiberal dictatorship.
Boo!
But just because we have those who can expose that our emperors have no clothes does not mean that we should suppose that we have escaped our repose. We are only left without a leash so long as we are trained to stay in the same playground.
Maoist police can SMD.
America, the highest form of hegemony?
Mm-hmm.
Despite granting its population some of the most powerful legal advantages for resistance, such as the widespread access to firearms, freedom of speech...
I was actually there when this happened. Like, I was at this protest. I was actually there when this happened. Yes, I was a witness to history. That dude, no. They almost shot each other. Like, neither one of them had any trigger discipline at all. And they tried to, like, parlay this into like some form of political power, and it ended up like even Republicans thought they were fucking wackos. Yeah, I saw.
Innocence still proven.
This was during the Stockley protests in 2017. The McCloskeys, yeah. I saw them. They actually saw the protests coming down Kings Highway. And I guess they had some type of sick idea in their head that they would go out and they would become famous, but they became famous, except not in the way that they thought they would.
Guilty. The U.S. regime has successfully maintained a level of class domination
Yeah, both of them were like fucking drunk and playing with guns. Like they were more of a danger to themselves than they were to us. But yeah, wild times.
Paralleled anywhere else in the so-called free world. This speaks volumes to the extraordinary level of power that the American corporate state holds over its citizens. The regimes which wield the most power do not rest on eliminating all resistance, nor do they rely on brute violence to maintain hegemony. Classically totalitarian regimes are not...
Actually, I misspoke. It wasn't in 2017, that was in 2020. So, still, all that shit blurs together, like it was only 3 years before.
Truly powerful. They are internally weak, as they are not confident that their populace will still obey the system and return to business as usual.
But the reason that the protest was taking place in the first place was because, oh shit, that jumped all the way back to the beginning. The reason that this protest was happening in the first place was because our former mayor, Lyda Crewson, had doxed a bunch of people who signed a letter to her demanding the defunding of the St. Louis Police Department. And, yeah, a lot of people did not like that. So a lot of people, like, we literally ran this lady out of office. She didn't run for re-election. But, yeah, that was what led to that.
The highest form of hegemony? Despite granting its population some of the most powerful legal advantages for resistance, such as the widespread access to firearms, freedom of speech, innocence still proven guilty, the U.S. regime has successfully maintained a level of class domination unparalleled anywhere else in the so-called free world. This speaks volumes to the extraordinary level of power that the American corporate state holds over its citizens. The regimes which wield the most power do not rest on eliminating all resistance, nor do they rely on brute violence to maintain hegemony. Classically totalitarian...
could have sworn that fucking thing was in 2017. I guess I'm just getting old.
Regimes are not truly powerful. They are internally weak, as they are not confident that their populace will still obey the system and return to business as usual if spaces for dissent and criticism are opened up. Contrary to popular common sense, power and freedom are not diametrically opposed to each other. Power at its highest manifests when freedom and obedience coincide, when the freedom of the dominated does not threaten the hegemony of the dominant. Whether the actors filling the roles of the system's power relations change does not necessarily change the power relations themselves. The long-term viability of a system can't depend on the power and cult of personality of a charismatic leader who rules with an iron.
You hear that, people who are like, oh, where's Stalin? Where's Lenin? Like, no. Our power comes from our ties with the masses. The masses are who bring communism to power, not one person. So when you talk about like how one person can implement fascism, or when you engage in this whole like hero worship shtick, you're actually delving into fascism a little bit.
Fist. That is because if this leader falls through death or castration, the curtain of legitimacy that veils the system's authority will fall down with it. For a socio-political order to maintain long-term hegemony, it must firmly establish a legal system and institutional framework that reproduces the system and its class structures for generations, regardless of who is taking turns ruling it. This is the real genius of America's founding fathers and the framers of the US Constitution. They successfully created a system that protects not just their personal interests, but the interests of wealthy property owners as a whole for generations. After all, the Founding Fathers, influenced by John Locke, envisioned a system that championed the right to revolt against a despotic government, while simultaneously preventing any such revolt from endangering the power of their social class. They built a system with virtually unchangeable structures designed to meet the needs of the property-owning class and its factions, while effectively excluding the propertyless majority from all spaces of power. It's a self-regulating system that ensures its long-term stability through a decentralized separation of powers that prevents one single faction of the dominant classes from monopolizing power at the expense of the rest of the dominant classes, while also having centralized institutions of terroristic power that can destroy internal or external threats to that system, without any public accountability. But it must only go after enemies that it can get away with eliminating.
Oh, stop being mean to One Die. He has a very good radio voice.
Or those who pose a serious threat to its hegemony. For the rest of the population, the main form of social control must be a form of soft power. Dissent can be tolerated so long as it's disorganized and amounts to nothing. When a population is too demobilized and too depoliticized to do anything, the regime...
I love how he has, like, when he's saying demobilized and powerless, he has a fucking clip of an anarchist flag flying. I just caught your shade, Tony.
The regime should have no problem allowing harsh criticisms of it. It won't be affected by a few dissenting forces that expose this.
Then he has the fucking revcoms. This has to be intentional. You put the shade in here on purpose.
State's past crimes, years after they have already been committed. The American state has even allowed public access to some national security documents that
heavily redacted, though.
Straight up admit to some of its past lawless endeavors, like some of the CIA-backed coups around the world. Given such confidence and obedience, one must reconsider. Has the power of the American corporate regime truly declined?
No.
Contrary to the environment of the McCarthy-era Red Scare, in recent decades, media corporations have had very little issue platforming various films and TV shows echoing anti-capitalist critiques, albeit even if such critiques are often shallow. At first glance, the fact that surface-level anti-capitalist critiques are becoming more fashionable may suggest that the public is becoming increasingly more conscious of the system's flaws. However, vague diagnoses of the existing society's ills does not make a dent in the political scene, so long as there are not alternative political prescriptions on the horizon. If anything, pseudo-politics and enabling one-dimensional critiques of the system might even strengthen it. It is in the system's interest to allow people to vicariously enjoy their transgressive desires through consuming politically conscious media to feel better about themselves. And this can also be the case with so-called real-life activism, like engaging in
real-life activism, like standing around singing Christmas carols as hundreds of people die every day.
Depoliticized activist initiatives promoted by the nonprofit industrial complex.
I love that term.
In fact, there is a whole activism industry propped up by NGOs and facilitated by neoliberal universities. There's a great video on
God damn, Tony, you spicy.
this from the YouTube channel called Another Slice, which I highly recommend watching. Allow me to share a personal anecdote. Back in my undergrad days, I was enrolled in a certain university program geared towards pumping out individuals who would become part of what can be called the professional managerial class. Those who graduated from this university program would typically go into one of the three career pathways. They would either end up working for the government bureaucracy or one of the mainstream political parties, end up somewhere in the corporate private sector, or find an internship within the nonprofit industrial complex. This one typically attracted the most left-leaning people in the program, whose progressive moral inclinations would be exploited by NGOs who would give them the illusion that they are changing the world.
But they're not. In
other words, all three pathways would lead straight into the hands of the establishment, what we might call our socio-political matrix. I saw
We're in the matrix.
firsthand how people got reabsorbed into this matrix, but I managed to get away from it, and so can you.
That was a fucking banger, Tony. Even if I don't disagree, even if I disagree with it, well, I don't disagree with it. I just disagree with this framing. Like it's Marcuse, and actually, he's actually inspired me to read Marcuse. I meant to say even if I disagree with him on certain things, like I don't agree with I don't agree with heterodox Marxism. I'm a Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, but it's good to have friends that come from all traditions. And ultimately, he reaches the right conclusions. That's really all that matters. The revolutionary communists of America are founding a party. Ooh.
Ago, the capitalist class argued that a new millennia of prosperity and stability was opening up. The Soviet Union had collapsed and the ruling class saw this as the final victory of capitalism, the dawn of a new golden age.
Liberal democracy is really all there is now, and we've seen that now in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Communism was in a sense undermined.
But in just a single generation, everything has changed entirely.
Our generation has known nothing but economic crisis, war, political instability, debt, alienation, and misery. There was a brief upswing.
What made you predict that? Hey, where'd my video go? There we go.
30 years ago.
Oh, there it is. The USIMT. That's what led you predicted it.
The capitalist class argued that a new millennia of prosperity and stability was opening.
Communism,
debt, alienation, and misery.
There was a brief upswing for capitalism from the late 40s to the early 1970s.
My computer is a good Maoist. It doesn't want me watching trot content.
After World War II. But life has gotten
What's this? Ben Carson? Oh, damn. I thought that bastard was dead.
harder by truly every metric since that period came to an end.
And that era of capitalist stability is never coming back. This half-century process of decline has now reached a tipping point.
It is self-evident, indisputable, and impossible to ignore that we live in a society in decline. Living standards have worsened for several generations. Meaningful job prospects are more
Any bets on there being a single black person in this video?
scarce than ever. Meanwhile, the capitalist inability to manage climate change threatens the foundations of human civilization itself. That's why in the last 15 years, we have seen increasing political turmoil and radicalization. The 2008 financial crisis, one of our generation's earliest memories, was just the beginning of this process.
Then, in 2016, Bernie Sanders came onto the national scene. There was widespread interest in socialism for the first time in decades. But the reformist socialists like Sanders, AOC, and DSA capitulated to the capitalist.
Oh, you bitches. All right, so they're already like, this is the Trots always do this. They're already trying to compare themselves to other people. They're always trying to, like I saw one of the comrades in DSA from the Twin Cities. Like the Trots came, these IMT Trots, the people that are founding the Revolutionary Communists of America, which can also stand for Radio Corporation of America. Like they slapped a sticker on their fucking building. Like, why would you do that? Like why don't you go to the masses? Like, why are you trying to poach other leftists and stuff? Trots are parasites. They always do that.
in every way.
The time for reformist tinkering is long gone. We need to fight for the complete overthrow of capitalism. We need to organize for a socialist revolution in our lifetime. For the first time in generations, the idea of communism resonates with wide layers of society.
Yeah, this is a cult. This is a cult.
A 2023 poll found that 20% of young people believe that communism is their ideal economic system. This process of radicalization.
They said communism, not Trotskyism. Okay, lady, your voice is boring me. But yeah, I've heard some iffy shit about the IMT. And they think that they are the only communists. Anybody that thinks that they are the only communists around, they're probably not the only communists around. They're probably pieces of shit that you probably don't want anything to do with. But yeah. So that's pretty much what's happened today. Continue to think about what you can do. Like, what did I do to help free Palestine today? And check the news tomorrow and see if they're talking about Comrade Aaron. Because they need to. Like, he's trending on Twitter. And we cannot let him be forgotten. We cannot let him be forgotten. And we cannot let the people of Palestine be forgotten. Otherwise, he will have died in vain. And communists don't let their comrades die in vain. I'll stick with DSA. Me too. Like, the funny thing is that, like, I have... People were telling me, like, oh, you're going to hate DSA. You're going to be... DSA is not in line with your politics. I actually met more Maoists in DSA than I did when I wasn't in DSA. Like, people that don't even know that they're Maoist yet, but they've come to all the Maoist conclusions. So, I'm going to be in DSA for quite a while. So, Soy Redgar. Oh, Stalin has to go. I did a poll last night. One has to go. Received almost 5,000 votes. And Stalin swept it. So Stalin is now kicked out of the canon of revolutionary leadership. Honestly, he's probably my least favorite of the hits. So I'm not disappointed. But you know who's going to be with you forever? BRG. Peace.